Let's get started with the head itself based on this melon. And I'm going to start with the newest, most powerful selection tool that we have, and the one you'll probably use more than anything else for image-based selections, but we'll see some of its limitations here too. I'm going to use the quick selection tool. Now with this, and I go ahead and make the brush a little bigger so you can see it better. Won't change how it works particularly. I start selecting the parts of the image that I want to be part of the selection. And from that, it learns what I'm looking for. And suddenly it says, oh, okay, you want this stuff. And for the most part, it's gotten exactly what I want. There will be some places where it'll be off a little bit. It looks at these areas and says, oh, you know, that looks like it goes with this. And you can train this. Here I'm going to make the brush smaller again, to point at these areas and hold down the Alt key to remove things, and it learns from that. If I click here, it's not just making an adjustment where I'm clicking, but it applies that other places too. Okay, and so little give and take, you can get it to recognize your selection eventually. And the eventually part means that there might actually be other tools that can solve the problem in those areas. One thing you should remember is that you can combine selection tools. So here, it followed this line rather than selecting this. I'm going to go and use the tool to add in areas. Although this gray here, I'm not sure if that's actually part of what I want. I do want that part. Okay, so, you know, it's kind of a training thing. This, not this. And you go around. And I could see some other rough spots. So at some point, you say, well, okay, this looks about right. But then you go into select and mask to look at it in different ways. And here on a black background, it shows you the things that are sticking out a little more obviously. And you can look at this, you know, different ways. You know, when we're creating the selection, we have the marching ants. Onion skin just kind of, you know, makes the non-selected area partly transparent. And depending on the image, you know, looking at it on black, like if it's something with a light background, looking at it on black will show you some of the problem areas better than if you look at it on white. Let's look at it as a black and white image, because a selection is a channel, and a channel is essentially a grayscale image. You know, when you're looking at it as a selection, white is completely selected, black is completely not selected, and then there's usually some gray area. If we zoom in here, we see around the edges there's some gray pixels. So this is a soft selection to make it smoother. Zoom back out here. So there are a number of ways we can improve this. We can continue to use the quick selection tool and subtract areas that we don't want, and that's primarily what we're dealing with here. But there's a limit to that. We can just go in and paint things out. So, you know, for instance, here I'm adding to the selection. I'm going to undo that. If I hold down the Alt key, I can remove things. So I can just kind of paint out things that I don't think should be there. And you have some control over the brush, the size of the brush, and also the softness. So this is a 45 pixel brush, 60% hard, so there is a little bit of feathering on this as we paint along the edge. Now, there are some other tools over here that we can use to kind of clean this up. One is that I know that this melon is very smooth, and this selection, based on its criteria, is a little rough. I could add some smoothing to this, see what that does, and that kind of evens out some of those irregular bits as we look at it. Now, when you do this, you might be losing some detail that you're interested in. So, I'm going to want to check this, like look at this on black. This looks much smoother. Look at it on white. This looks pretty clean too. I'm kind of liking this. Let's go back to the black and white image. Well, no, let's look at this on black. I can see this pretty well on black. Although I'm actually going to be using it on a white background. I created a white background for the Melon Head guy. So I'll look at it here. Sometimes if there's a color fringe, you can shift the edge in to remove some of that. But we're actually not seeing any of that here, so if we look at this as a black and white image again and zoom in on the edge, we'll see that this has been smoothed out and it's kind of soft, making for a smooth kind of edge here. If we change the contrast, we can get a sharper edge here. If you go too far with that, you get this aliased effect, which we don't want. So I'm going to back off the contrast to a point where we have a nice, clean edge that's not too soft. Okay, so that looks like it should be nice and smooth. Double check on white background here. Zoom out. And, I'm liking this, so I'm going to click OK. Okay, now I have a refined selection. Now, I could save the selection in channels. Go over here and save this if I want to use it again. But what I'm going to do here is actually turn this selection into a layer mask. When I click on this button here, you see that we've added a layer mask. And the mask basically represents the transparency of the layer. So here we have the image. Nothing has been deleted. This is non-destructive image editing. All we've done is added a mask that says what parts are opaque, what parts are transparent. And along the edge there's some intermediate transparency. So in creating a layer mask, the procedure is you create a selection. Typically I'll show you one example where we diverge from that. You create a selection, and then you click on the Create Layer Mask button to turn the selection into a layer mask. So this is, again, a channel. This is a black and white image, and we can still actually manipulate this. If I went and took a brush and drew on if I took a brush and drew with white on the layer mask, we could actually make more of the image visible. If I switch to black, I could go and make parts of the image transparent for this layer. Okay, so again, this is just a channel. We can manipulate it. We still have all the original data here on the layer, so that if I actually remove the layer mask, the image is there again. Okay, so I'm going to undo a few times here to get back to the actual image that I wanted. All right, so let's work with this. One of my favorite ways of copying something to a different image is to drag it off here so that I can use the move tool and drag the layer over and then minimize that. So here we have this on here. Now, one of the things we want to look at with all this stuff is lighting. The lighting here was from the right. You see the shading here, a highlight here. So for like a typical head, this isn't really what you want. So I'm going to, now I could do Control T to do freeform transformations, which is here. Although I could just turn on show transform controls and do it right here within the move tool. And so I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to actually rotate it a little more than 90 degrees here so that it's more of a vertical. And I can, adjust this as we go along, but that looks okay to me. So here I have the melon oriented the way I want for my portrait. Here we have a white background. Here we have a layer that is the head. And I'm going to name all my layers so it's really clear to me what the different layers are. This one is kind of obvious. Some of the other ones where we have smaller items, the name will be really helpful. Okay, so let's look at some of our other elements here.